Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
We all go a little mad sometimes. Surprise, Sydney. What's the matter, Sydney? You look like you've seen a ghost.
Hello. So, as the spooky season has arrived, being October and everything, I'd like to talk about what I consider my favourite horror movie. Scream, in my opinion, isn't just an amazing horror movie, but it's also an amazing film in general. It's one of my favourite films, but today I'll just be talking about it in the context of horror. So first of all, what stands out to a lot of people, and what I believe it does incredibly well, is the subversion of tropes. You see this instantly in the very first scene. The killer is introduced immediately, like 5 seconds into the film, and it has the balls to kill off the most famous actress in the film, which is amazing and something that still is lacking in movies nowadays, like with the Suicide Squad. No one expected Harley Quinn to die because she's such a big part of the DC universe. But anyway, building upon that, the amount of well-known actors in this film is incredible. You've got Drew Barrymore, Henry Winkler, Matthew Lillard, and Courtney Cox, of course. And each of them give such an interesting performance and such a sort of critique on certain horror characters, which I believe is done so well. Speaking of horror, this film instantly references loads of horror films, separating it as a meta parody of such slasher films. They bring up Friday the 13th, Halloween, and Nightmare on Elm Street. And I've honestly heard people say that the acting in Scream isn't very good or it feels too goofy. But I think the acting's perfect. The acting works for each character really well. For example, Matthew Lillard as Stu. I mean, a lot of people aren't a fan of over-the-top acting in general. That's why some people make fun of Nick Cage films, for example. But his acting feels so interesting and entertaining to watch, and at the end of the day, having a character who you're excited to see on screen just because he entertains you so much is truly what, like, a film of specifically commercial value can truly hope to do, which it does perfectly. I love Stu in this film. He's probably my favourite character, and perhaps my favourite character in any horror film. Speaking of Stu, the twist of Billy and Stu both being the killer, I think, is an amazing subversion of the classic lone outsider with pent-up mental issues wreaking havoc on people, when it's actually two guys who are doing it for pretty minor reasons. I mean, Stu claims it was peer pressure, which is great. That's just really funny. And the fact that these kids, these 35-year-old high schoolers, come off as such psychopaths. But it's not just them. The whole school acts so nonchalantly, really, to kids being murdered, which I think is a really interesting way of critiquing the way we react and absorb horror films in general. Going back to the twist of the two killers, it may not seem clear upon a first watch, but on a second watch, there are some really good clues and hints that point to this, specifically with Stu. For example, there's a scene in which Sydney opens a cupboard when she's back at home alone, and there's intense music building, because typically in these sorts of films, as she's opened the cupboard door, when she closes it, the killer will be behind it, and when that doesn't happen, you think, oh, they did that just to scare you. But then later on, in that same scene, Stu comes out of that cupboard, meaning he was in there the whole time, which is just amazing foreshadowing. As well as that, there's also, in that scene, Stu is attacking Sydney, and he headbutts her, and then in the next scene where we see Stu, he's looking in the mirror, poking at his forehead, seeing if he has a bruise. And as well as that, there's also subtle nuances in the way both Billy and Stu act differently. Billy is a lot more artistic in his manner of killing, holding up the knife with a single hand as when he kills Casey at the beginning, whereas Stu is much more forceful, holding the knife with two hands in a more stabbing motion. Furthermore, as well as being a parody of loads of past horror films, this film also invents new tropes which I really like. For example, the trope of the horror movie buff, which I think is an amazing trope, one of my favourite tropes, and is perfect at poking fun at horror in a self-referential way. So, to summarise, if you've only watched Scream once or twice, give it another watch this Halloween season, looking out for these clues, and I guarantee in some ways you'll get more out of it. Also, it's really refreshing to see a horror movie villain who's kind of bad at his job.